Welcome to Woking Up.
White supremacy. White supremacy is the fringe of the fringe.
This is a mini-series brought to you by Polite Conversations.
All of a sudden we can't talk about Neanderthal DNA anymore.
Here I'll talk about my journey into and out of being a new atheist Sam Harris fan.
In and of itself, that video is not evidence of racism.
I'm your ex-Muslim host, Ina. No, not the right-wing kind. Thank you for tuning in.
This is how the left will die.
All right, I am back with yet another edition of Woking Up. And congratulations, America, on at least sort of booting out the awful orange fasci clown. What a roller coaster that's been and continues to be. I thought I was going to take a longer break after pushing the last two episodes out about a week apart, but it seems that I might have to do a post-US election one after all. A slight detour from my planned episodes about this journey, but still very relevant to the larger conversation on this fascinating and nauseating topic of Harrisology. I had to do it because it really cements just how wrong Sam's consistently been, how bad his judgment is, and just how culty those who still orbit him are. It's been pretty hilarious watching the IDW flip-flopping and infighting around this time. The infighting is a thing of beauty. As I said on Twitter, I would love to see one of them accuse another in their little group of cancel culture against Trump or something. That would be poetic. But let's back up a bit and zoom into the subject of this mini-series and take a look at the evolution of our extremely rational hero and his extremely rational takes throughout the course of this election season. From pre-election to during it and post-election too. Some real high-level ideas happening here. Honestly, this display of constant bad judgment, as you're about to see, and cowardice, just makes me wonder how anyone takes this guy seriously at all anymore. Let's dive in, shall we? Yes. The very last bit of pre-election content Sam bestowed upon us mere mortals was a mini episode about 8 minutes long. Actually, that's very dishonest of you, Ina. It was 8 minutes and 22 seconds long. Get your facts straight. This just goes to show how much you lie about everything. Let me tell you, this is not that much of an exaggeration of the kinds of pedantic comments I get from Sam fans. But anyway, Sam's 8-minute and 22-second mini episode was exactly what you'd expect, pretty much. Though he criticized Trump in it, in his unique way that we discussed last episode. The core point it all hinged on was that he suddenly had this epiphany, like hours before the election, and now he amazingly understood why half his country liked and voted for Trump last time. Because in contrast, you see, the woke left was so horrid and judgy and sanctimonious, and they canceled poor straight white cis men, so that these innocent angels were left with no other choice but to become Trumpers. Now, after all these years of Trump, at the last hour. Sam had finally understood this. Shush, 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 shush. Never mind that he literally has been repeating this fucking talking point of left bad, therefore Trump, for the entirety of Trump's term. Look, he wants you to believe that he's just now come to this incredible, refreshing new viewpoint, okay? Can you just give him that, you mean wokeists?
Okay, well, it is the day before the presidential election, and I don't know why it's taken me this long to understand this. Until a few minutes ago, I had more or less reconciled myself to never understanding this. But I believe at this late hour, on the very eve of the 2020 election, I have discovered a significant part of Trump's appeal. So his appeal has been a total mystery to me. But I believe I have now solved that mystery. Again, I don't know why it took me so long. And this picture of Trump's appeal is really best understood in comparison with the messaging of his opponents on the left. That's how you can see it in stereo. That's how the image finally pops out. So taking the Trump half of this picture. One thing that Trump never communicates, and cannot possibly communicate, is a sense of his moral superiority. The man is totally without sanctimony. Even when his every utterance is purposed towards self-aggrandizement, even when he appears to be denigrating his supporters, even when he's calling himself a genius, he is never actually communicating that he is better than you, more enlightened, more decent, because he's not, and everyone knows it. And now consider the other half of this image. What are we getting from the left? We're getting exactly the opposite message. Pure sanctimony, pure judgment. You are not good enough. You're guilty not only for your own sins, but for the sins of your fathers. The crimes of slavery and colonialism are on your head. And if you're a cis, white, heterosexual male, which we know is the absolute core of Trump's support, you're a racist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, sexist barbarian. Tear down those statues and bend the fucking knee. It's the juxtaposition of those two messages that is so powerful.
What a gem of a mini episode. Just put yourself in the anti-Trump pre-election mindset for a second. It's so valuable to shit on the left and say you understand Trump supporters now. And to mention how that newfound understanding will make you less of an asshole towards them, not towards the left, heaven forbid.
So I sincerely hope we rid ourselves of him tomorrow. But I believe I now understand the half of the country that disagrees with me a little better than I did yesterday. And this makes me less confused and judgmental. Less of an asshole, probably. Which is always progress.
Sam's words were just so useful and necessary at that precise moment in time, you know? Especially as a Trump hater who definitely doesn't want to pander to Trumpians in his audience or anything. Just an extremely helpful thing to put out on your massive platform the day before the election. Oh, and the episode he released just before that with Andrew Sullivan was quite interesting too, where they expressed their incredible reasons for disliking Trump and fearing he would win. Extremely normal reasons to hate Trump, like the fact that he stigmatizes great causes like immigration control, And he emboldens the evil SJWs and hasn't been able to defang the very worst of the left. Yeah, that's the real problem with Trump, you see.
We haven't even seen any serious permanent or rooted policies in controlling or changing the dynamic on immigration, which, if Biden gets in, will be back to square one. That we haven't actually seen a war of ideas that has defanged some of the worst elements of the left. If anything, Trump seems to me to have presided over enormous strengthening of elements on the extreme left. And that he has been their best friend in so many ways by making it almost impossible to counter some of these trends on the far left without seeming to defend the indefensible. So on those people who once substantively are sympathetic to a more adjusted, as it were, conservatism, I don't think Trump has been competent enough to deliver it. And I think in many ways, he's been extraordinarily counterproductive in that effect. And I think, for example, he's done more to stigmatize and taint the cause of some kind of control of mass immigration than anyone on the left could ever have done. And I think that's really emboldening the people that he said he was trying to oppose and disempower.
Yeah, well, your point about the way in which he's empowered the far left is very important, because this is a very common claim that Trump is some kind of bulwark against the craziness on the left. But to the contrary, Trump has empowered the far left, and he has given his ugliness has given the far left whatever semblance of justification it's had, right? I mean, his flirtation with racism, his failure to clearly repudiate white supremacy. I mean, he has repudiated white supremacy to a greater degree than people on the left give him credit for. I mean, he has actually done it in places, but he's done it so badly and so unconvincingly that he is almost the perfect goblin to merit the counter-reaction on the left. And so
And with all the racism and white supremacy strangely cropping up around him, just slight flirtations by Trump, let's not go overboard and concretely call it out as very racist or anything like the left would do. Ew.
all the craziness of the wokeness cult and the overreaching of Black Lives Matter and all of that has happened on Trump's watch, and you could certainly argue in large measure because of Trump and because of how bad he is. So it's just the idea that he is somehow a corrective to this seems crazy.
You see, the biggest problem with Trump is that he distracts from the real important conversation about wokeness and makes wokeness fearmongers look unhinged and not credible. That's why rational people don't want him to win, guys. He only flirted with racism, but just look at the other horrible things he's caused to happen. Movements like Black Lives Matter. The horror. And maybe under Biden, they can finally pivot back and focus on that with some credibility. Priorities, right?
And what I would expect to have under Biden is not, the full capture of Biden by the wokeness. I would expect all of us to be able to far more credibly pivot and turn our attention on the wokeness. And repudiate it. I mean, not to say we haven't been doing that, but we now do it under the shadow that the right and the far right under Trump has managed to produce. Whereas under a Biden administration, the wokeness can be discussed as, in terms that reveal it to be as unhinged and unpragmatic as it is.
I called this shit in my last Woken Up episode. What was it that I said last time? But either way, you know the IDW will pivot accordingly to make sure they are still firing directly at what they think is the equivalent of the left in the situation. Shocking, I know. At least Sullivan admits he's a conservative, for fuck's sake. Unlike some other people who just happen to agree with the right almost all the time, and who happen to be aware that there are Trumpers listening to their content and worried even about driving them from their audience.
What do you make of the fact, though, that there are people, if we haven't already driven them from our audience, there are people listening to us who just don't understand this allergy we have to Trump.
Oh, and there was the obligatory defending Trump from accusations of racism. We can't go without that now, can we?
He's a racist, yes. But do I think he's a kind of long-standing white supremacist seeking to oppress? No, he's desperate for minority votes. He champions them. He talks about them all the time. It's more complicated than that. And I think...
Can you imagine participating in a conversation like this without any pushback? As if it's normal to say Trump champions minorities all the time. Yes, okay, fine. He's maybe a little racist and maybe flirting with racism, but definitely not in the way the left likes to talk about him. And like the Christchurch shooter, who was apparently just trolling and not really committed to white supremacy as an ideology, according to Sam, Trump, too, is apparently not a committed racist. You know who's always ideologically committed, though? The Muslims and the wokeists, of course. But with everyone else, it's hard to say, really.
Well, he's totally without ideology. He's not committed to anything.
What are the left even on about? Calling Trump racist? Trump? It's so far-fetched. I mean, sure, he's a racist because Sam knows the tapes of the N-word exist, but it's not like that's his bar for racist or anything. And also, everything the left says he's racist about is wrong. In fact, there's not really even much public evidence of his racism anyway.
I do think, I believe, to a moral certainty that I have evidence that he's racist, but it's not especially public evidence. And I've talked about this before, but I know at least two people who have it directly from Mark Burnett that he buried the Apprentice tapes, and that on those tapes you've got Trump using the N-word in earnest, not talking about it as a word, but just using it because that's what he calls these people.
These people. Yikes. Now, dear listeners, we're on to Election Day. Boy, did Sam have some takes for us then. Please subscribe via patreon.com/nicemangoes to hear the full episode. By supporting on Patreon, you'll get access to all Patreon exclusive content, including Woking Up and early releases of Polite Conversations too, as well as special patron events like AMAs and Skype chats. If you enjoy the show, do consider supporting, because without listeners like you, deep dive content like this isn't possible.